Greetings, good evening, and welcome to the Saroth the Mage channel. As promised, I've got Taliesin McKnight and Theophilos Peleus of Logos of Ophiel. How you doing, guys?
Doing pretty well. Glad to be here.
I'm excited for the show. Fantastic.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to it all week. We did it, was it 2 weeks ago? And it ran for almost 4 hours. But editing proved to be a problem, so we're just going to treat it tonight like it's a live stream. So if there's any problems, just keep going.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah,
So
4 hours, man. It was a long.
It was a good discussion.
A good one, yeah.
Yeah, I've listened to it a few times, and if I had the editing skills, I would have put together a nice little show out of that. But we'll just go straight through tonight. So the theme is Renaissance classical magic. Who would like to get me started on just like a broad definition of Renaissance classical magic?
Sure. I can get started with that. This is Taliesin McKnight. So the Renaissance, the word Renaissance means rebirth. And this is the period of history that basically follows the medieval period, often called the Dark Ages. It was Petrarch, the 15th century poet and philosopher Petrarch, that coined the term Dark Ages, and put it up as opposed to this rebirth or this revival. So basically, in the western part of Europe, this is after the fall of Rome. The Visigoths had sacked Rome, and after the fall of Rome, there was a fall in trade, literacy, basically war, famine. Some historians think that this has been exaggerated, but it certainly does seem to be a feature of this period of time. This is why it is often referred to as the Dark Ages. The light of Rome had been extinguished. And so, but of course, this knowledge continued, a lot of it in the Arab world as well as in Byzantium, and the Byzantine Empire in the East actually never fell at this time. But the Renaissance actually means rebirth. And this is from the 14th century up until the 17th century, or into the 17th century. And this would be marked by a rebirth of interest in classical philosophy, architecture, and art. So yeah, there would be basically people were getting into the classics. People were reading Plato. They were reading Aristotle, Cicero, basically reading these classical texts, Macrobius. It was actually Cosimo de' Medici in the 14th. It was actually Cosimo de' Medici in the 15th century that commissioned Marsilio Ficino, a cleric, to translate what were lost works of Plato into Latin from Greek. So there were a couple of dialogues that had survived or were known in the West, but a large portion of the works were lost. So Plato was being translated. He actually translated the Corpus Hermeticum. Marsilio Ficino is a really good figure for understanding the Renaissance and what it means for classical magic and occultism. He started a Platonic academy based on Plato's original academy. He was a Neoplatonist. He wrote, I think, 6 volumes on Platonic theology. He wrote a commentary on Plato's Symposium, translated the Corpus Hermeticum. So he made, I think, commentaries on Plotinus. So again, this was a revival of classical knowledge. And this is also the period of history in which we have the grimoires. By many people, this is seen as the golden age of magic. Now, that does not mean that this is just a watering down of classical knowledge. Not at all. This was also a very high development. As I said, I would consider this the golden age of classical magic is the Renaissance, and also a lot of the earlier works are incomplete, fragmented, lost. So it's really the Renaissance. Not only is it highly developed, but it's a very deep form of magic. Not only is it highly developed form of magic in the Renaissance period, but we also have a large collection of works as reference. So this is what we're here referring to as classical magic. And again, that is from the 14th century up into the 17th century, roughly.
Fascinating. Another thing that I think contributed to the Renaissance was the increase again in literacy in the printing press. So it was books were readily available to like your more average citizen.
I would say they were more accessible to people who were educated. Back then, there was a thing called the classical education, and this was largely provided by university and the church. And this is very important to note. When we do look into these different aspects, especially that of the church, we see that a lot of these people were once again clerics, or a lot of these people had both college and they were working for the church. This was certainly the case for most scholars. When we look at Cornelius Agrippa, he was really, I would say, a secretary for a king at age 18. He later joined the army. And then when we look at Agrippa, not only did he do that, he studied astrology, he studied medicine, which was typical for a scholar of his time. And we have to look at this correspondence because even in his last days, he was working for the church. So even he had a degree in arts. I don't think he ever reached a PhD level, but he certainly had enough education in order to write something like the 3 books of occult philosophy. And he knew enough people in these circles at the time in order to make sort of his own academic notes on it. So literature was somewhat different during this period. While we have more direct communication, such as the author writing like, say, an I and you, these people, they wrote primarily in a third-party narrative. You know, for example, when you read through Agrippa's works, it reads more like a poetic college paper. And rather than citing sources in some cases, back then, what we would call plagiarism, you know, he took quotes in there directly from the source. And he even mentioned names in there and everything else. So some of it was abstract and poetic because of a few reasons. One, because it was metaphysical in nature. And two, because you are working with the classics, which were a little bit abstract. And when we think of the word occult, it means hidden. And this is something really big, hidden. And this is something that we didn't understand at this period. And Agrippa uses a very good example here, such as the idea of the stomach. How does the stomach digest food? He didn't know about stomach acid, so he saw how food digesting as a occult mystery. And another part we have to talk about is the influence of the church. Now, when Agrippa was around, it was right around 450 years earlier that there was a split between the Coptic Church and the Catholic Church. So we have a division between the East and the West.
You mean the Orthodox?
Yeah,
Coptics were earlier.
the Orthodox and the Catholic Church. Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Because I like the Coptics and I have dyslexia, so sometimes I confuse words. But to make a long story short, pretty much the West was still ruled by the Catholic Church. And one thing that I've discovered is if you pick up the Catholic Catechism, you'll actually see this worldview that we talk about. It fills in the gaps. For example, if you go to forums, people will argue, what is an angel? People say an angel is a spirit. Well, it's a little bit nuanced, and St. Augustine addresses this perfectly. He says an angel is a spirit, but its office is an angel, a divine office, and this and the nature of these spirits is higher. And you had this theology of the 9 orders of the angels too. And honestly, the archangels are at the bottom of the pole, or near the bottom of the pole in this hierarchy. So when we look at this, we are looking at a dominant view. And just like I recommended to you, Saro, to read the Elizabethan World Picture, because this outlines this idea. And we have another theological thing occurring here, or a mixing of the worldview. And even before we continue, I should say that we will be focusing on a Neoplatonic Marsilio Ficino model of the chain of being and on the cosmology, because this is what the writers used. But I must clarify that even before Marsilio Ficino into the Middle Ages, there was this chain of being, which we will get into, and it was different links to different hierarchies, which created sympathetic properties for everything. And imagine all these different chains coming from heavens, and an angel, an herb being linked to a spirit, to a planet, and all the way to God and all that. So before that, before Ficino came in, you would not find a world soul, but you would certainly find the different hierarchies. So Ficino really threw a wrench in the machine at the time, and it was so nuanced, so different, and it was his idea sort of created an animistic universe. So we have to look at this aspect, and another thing we have to keep in mind during this period is there was literally no divorce between magic and religion. That's very important. So,
is it okay if I chime in something here?
Yeah,
Yeah,
of
yeah.
course, just feel free.
There were works of Plato, but it was very, very small. Ficino actually translated a lot of lost works of Plato. So although there may have been, little bits of Platonism here and there, really Ficino was the one that helped to spur this big Neoplatonic revival. Like I said, there were works that were largely lost in the West, which he had translated. But what you say that there is that religion and magic, there's a fine line. I would say that. I would say that this is very true for many grimoires, such as the Key of Solomon. Basically, the technology is based upon basically ecclesiastical procedures. For example, the consecration of holy water from the Key of Solomon comes straight out of the Catholic Church. They bless the salt, they bless the water, they do all of this. It's really funny because the actual process used in a lot of what we would consider what we would call traditional Wicca. I exercise the creature of salt or I exorcise thee, O creature of water, that thou cast out from thee all the spirits of the world of phantasm, that they may harm us not. This comes right out of the Key of Solomon, and from the Key of Solomon back to the Catholic Church. So it's really interesting that one of the main elements of a Wiccan ritual actually circle back to the Catholic Church. So that's really interesting. But there was this technology. Basically, the magician felt like they were interacting with the spiritual realm. So it only makes sense that religion would play a big role there. But I would say that there were some forms of magic that were not so church-based, such as the Picatrix. But of course, that comes from largely an Islamic grimoire. The Picatrix gives a much, basically, you burn the incense, you hold you basically pray directly to the planet and light the incense, and you hold the talisman over the incense smoke. And you see also some pagan elements and Cosimo de' Medici. For example, he would recite the Orphic hymns. Even Pico della Mirandola, who was basically one of the first figures to try to unite Christianity with Jewish Kabbalah, even he said that the Orphic hymns were the most powerful way to call upon the planets, invoke. I say invoke because classical magic did not make a distinction between evoke and invoke. Invoke and evoke were the same thing in classical magic. It is a modern lodge magic idea that to evoke is to call outside of you and invoke is inside. That's more Crowley, the Golden Dawn. But in classical magic, when you invoke something, it did not mean to call into you. It just mean to call forth, basically. But basically, even that was based in religion. It was just a revival of pagan religion. Neoplatonism is essentially a revival of paganism. And the Orphic hymns were part of pagan polytheistic religion to call on the gods and goddesses, the Orphic hymns. And they were used by Marsilio Ficino. And the Picatrix has you pray directly to a planet. So I would say that there is a fine line between basically religion and magic go hand in hand. But it's really interesting because there's also a revival of a pagan approach to things as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I was just going to say, like, the universe was seen as being alive. Every star, every planet was a living being. It had a soul, a spirit, an intelligence. You're basically interacting with a peopled cosmos. And Renaissance magic, you're working with the spirit of Venus or a spirit of Jupiter. You know what I mean? And this was all tied together with the world soul, which is something that we're going to get into more in depth. But I just wanted to say that I agree with everything that you said, that there's a fine line between Renaissance, basically magic and religion. And to a large extent, I think it's important to understand the worldview. The understanding the worldview of Renaissance magic is crucial. Basically, this is understanding the worldview of a system of magic, I think, is one of the most important things to actually practicing that system of magic. For example, when I used to get into hoodoo more, I tried to get into more of an animistic perspective, which is the worldview of hoodoo. I think when you practice a system of magic, it helps to get into that worldview. And this is subjective synthesis, is to get into the mindset of a system of magic.
Yes, and that's very helpful. And before I get in too deep into all of this, I want to explain first the chain of being here, because even before we go into the three worlds in this cosmology, some scholars arguably say four, but we're going to stick with the three from Agrippa. And there's this idea that, and this started out with Plato, and there was this chain of being, and in this chain of being, each link was from Zeus, and this chain of being went down to the earth. This went from to Plato to the Neoplatonists to the Aristotelians all the way to the popes. And what's interesting about this is with each link, it was a creation of life. So once we get around to Neoplatonism and the Renaissance, it changes up a little bit. We have the chain of being starting at the throne of God. So once again, earlier art depictions actually don't even have a world soul. They just have a chain of being. Marsilio Ficino comes in and he fully implements that Platonic view and kind of upgrades that medieval view. And so now we have something very different. The cosmology is very different. As I said, more animistic. So when we look at the three main Platonic texts I like to point to in order to understand the Renaissance and to understand Plato, there are three, and that is the Symposium, the Timaeus, and the Critias. So those are actually the three core fundamental things that influence the Renaissance the most out of all the texts. I mean, one could say the Apology, but it didn't have any, everybody do that, but it didn't have any like direct impact like those other three. But here we have this idea stemming from the Picatrix, and the Picatrix really innovated some ideas later on, and it really helped influence some of the cosmology, such as with the race. But there are three worlds here, and we'll go into all this. And the first world is the world of God. The Picatrix says that the first world is in God, and this is where all knowledge comes from. God, in this system, God is the beginning and the end of all magic, the beginning and the end of all things, the Alpha and the Omega. And all knowledge, since it's in there, we have no way of knowing it. Now, this was a little bit later upgraded uh, with Agrippa to be in the heavens, to where the angels are, to where heaven is, to where the nine orders are. And then, and that, remember, that's just one chain, right? So as we go down, then I like to see between the celestial, meaning the stars, between the celestial and heaven. I like to imagine this filter. I talk about it in one of my other videos. But in this filter, we begin to see this energy from the spiritual being divided and dispersed into life in the world soul, which is from the Timaeus. And the Timaeus is very important to this cosmology. I mean, this is a must read for the classical magician. So, and the thing is about, it first starts with the constellations. Each star, every constellation is where it really all begins. And then the layer under that is the actual seven planets, the active stars of astrology. So once again, I say astrology, not astronomy. And each star, every planet has an intelligence. Now, I would say Neoplatonists at this time, they debated what an intelligence was. And even then, this still sparks some sort of debate with scholars because I've tried to research this all over. Tilliard says that these are like lower angels, lower intelligences and everything, while other scholars have came out and said, no, like they're just not lower angels, they're just angels of the cosmos. So it's really hard to tell that. But what we do know is the intelligences of the heavens were very similar to the sirens in Plato. and they governed and moved the planets, and movement was a big thing, just like it was in Greek philosophy. And now we have to think of this like a natal chart, squares and trines, and these rays, which was an Islamic version. The world soul is directed through these rays through the moon. The moon was we have the Chaldean order of the planets. So the Saturn being the furthest, the moon being the most inner. So everything passes through the moon. She is the most receptive. Everything above the moon is perfect and orderly. Everything below the moon has its problems. It's more physical, more fallible. Um, what's the word I'm looking for? You can say more impure. This is where you get to sublunary spirits. So then it's directing the rays towards this geocentric model of the Earth. And then these rays being directed through the moon to the Earth, it creates life, it creates matter. So the world soul isn't just this one thing in the cosmos. It's that medium between the physical and the spiritual, and it's both unified, I should say indivisible and stable, but once it goes through that filter of the stars, it's divisible and unstable. So it's a very complex topic. And once it hits the Earth, then we get our sympathetic properties. And you can see these rays like the chain of being. So for example, if we get iron, that iron is linked to the spirit. And then the spirit is linked to an intelligence. We should talk about virtues. Okay. The iron has a virtue, the virtue has a spirit, the spirit is ruled by an angel. Then there's different hierarchies of angels. And it goes all the way up to this idea.
I would also like to go into this a little bit about the chain of being, and there are different ways of looking at the worlds. Of course, in Kabbalah, we're mostly familiar with four worlds: Atzilut, Berea, Yetzirah, and Asiya. But here we're looking at basically this is more of the Neoplatonic perspective, which made a huge impact upon Agrippa, Heinrich Cornelius Agrippa, the author of one of the most, I would say, the most important book of magic that has been written in 2,000 years, which is Agrippa's De Occulta Philosophia, often called by its English title, The Three Books of Occult Philosophy. In my opinion, this is the most important text. Any kind of a classical mage needs to have this book. This is essential, okay? This is absolutely essential. If you don't have Agrippa's Three Books of Occult Philosophy, then man, you're missing out. And basically, you take Agrippa's Three Books of Occult Philosophy. What I recommend is to just take a chapter. A chapter in Agrippa is about a page or two. It's about 2 pages, a page or two. It's very short as a chapter. Even though it's really short, I highly recommend taking one chapter, reading it, going and doing something, relax your mind a little bit, think about it maybe, and then go and read it again. And basically just meditate on that chapter. And I think that this is the best way to build subjective synthesis, to get into this classical magical mindset. But Agrippa is copying Marsilio Ficino, who again was at the center of the Neoplatonic revival of the Italian Renaissance and the 15th century in Florence. Basically, everything begins. Well, we could either start at the bottom of the chain or we could start at the top. I guess I'll start at the bottom. Here in the sublunary realm, in the elementary realm, we have metals, stones, plants, animals, things that we can see and touch. Okay? things that we can see and touch. We have plants, animals, stones, metals, things like that. Okay, so this is the bottom layer of reality and the classical magical perspective. The next level up is the astrological realm. Everything here, and this goes into the Hermetic adage, as above, so below. People often quote the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below. But there's an understanding that comes with that. Essentially, as above, so below is the doctrine that Agrippa is basically promoting in his great opus, his 3 books of occult philosophy. This, as above, so below, every stone, every metal, every animal, every plant, everything that we can see and touch has an astrological correspondence. Okay? Everything that we can see and touch is associated with a star, a planet, a cluster of stars, or with the zodiac sign. We use a tropical system of astrology in the West, and this is the model that they used. So zodiac does not equate to constellation. And something that I want to point out real quick, just to digress just for a moment, people often seem to have this idea that the Renaissance magicians were unaware that the constellations were not the zodiac. Tropical astrology is not a mistake. They clearly could see that the zodiac did not match the constellations. That was well known in the Renaissance. Anyone could look and see that, the constellation and zodiac were 2 different things. So this has been known. This has been known ever since Ptolemy, 2,000 years ago. So that's just a little pet peeve of mine I wanted to address. But basically everything, all metals, stones, plants, animals, everything here that we can see and touch was associated with a star or planet. So that the metal gold is associated with the sun. The rooster crows at sunrise. So this was seen as a solar bird. The lion was magnanimous. He had kind of a golden hair, had a mane that seemed like solar rays. Okay, and of course we have Leo, which is ruled by the sun. So every animal, every plant was associated with a planet, a star, a constellation, of which there were 48 constellations, and a zodiac, separate thing from constellation. And within every star, now we're going the next level up, is an intelligent being. We're dealing with the peopled cosmos here, okay? So every star, every planet has a spirit, is imbued with life. Every planet, every star, every cluster of stars has a soul, a spirit, an intelligence. It is a living being. So astrological magic is basically using the things below in order to contact the astrological spirits. So Renaissance magic is mostly, when you boil it down, what is the majority of Renaissance magic? It is dealing with astrological spirits. These are spirits of astrology. Absolutely. Whether you're making a talisman, of course, Ficino tends to differentiate between spiritual magic and natural magic. But generally, talismanic magic, as well as evocation, was interacting with the spirits of astrology. And basically, now we went from the bottom up. Okay, now moving from the top down, everything begins with the ideas in the mind of God. Okay, we have a hierarchy. It's like a pyramid. At the apex of this hierarchy. Okay, we have many beings, many agents, I guess you can say. But at the top of this was one God. And I know that's hard for us to wrap our minds around, but not only, this isn't just Christianity. This was a pagan perspective. If you read the Corpus Hermeticum or the Hermetic fragments of Stobaeus, the Hermetists, about 2,000 years ago, they were pagan. They believed in a divine mind. Everything began with the divine nous. And in Plato, everything stems from the one or the good. Okay? Everything stems from the one or the good. The ideas are not God, but they all come, well, the ideas are not the good, but they come from the good. Plato says, as the rays from the sun. So in Plato's Timaeus, there is a creator that fashions the universe as a living soul. And of course, with Ficino, for example, the planets, the stars, these basically these spirits, okay, of the planets. Some people would consider them deities. Some people would consider them deities, like Apollo or whatever, or angels of the planets, whatever. These were seen as limbs of the world. Okay, so if you're dealing with the sun, you're dealing with the limb of the world. These are all part of one universal being. This one universal being the anima mundi, the universal soul. The universe is a living being that has life. But basically, the divine ideas stem from the divine nous. Okay, Plato's prime mover. Plato's the good, the monad, the Pythagorean monad. Everything comes from the one. And of course, within a Renaissance perspective, this would usually be interpreted as God. So the one or God interacts with creation through intermediary beings or spiritual beings or agents. Well, the divine ideas are impressed upon the universal soul through the seminal reasons of the world. These seminal reasons manifest as the pattern of the stars, and through the stars manifest things on earth, essentially. So yeah, basically what we have, like I said, everything has an astrological correspondence. If you walk around your house, you have a table that is, you have a table that's black. Black is the color of Saturn. You have a clock on the wall, that's Saturn. You have a red t-shirt. Red is the color of Mars. You add peppers to your food. Peppers are a martial, fiery, associated with Mars. You add onions to your food. You're eating essentially Mars. You basically anything that any object, a book could be considered associated with Mercury. It's communication. Basically, the 7 planets are the 7 archetypes that basically everything could be associated with the planet. And here in a little bit, I'll get into building this into a subjective synthesis, because this is part of a process of internalization, of building in this worldview, and of causing the microcosm to be a perfect reflection of the macrocosm. And this is the internalization of the language of magic, essentially, which is astrology. You know, there are 3 Hermetic sciences: alchemy, astrology, and magic. And alchemy is always seen as the superior one because the other 2 rely upon astrology. Astrology is the foundation of classical magic, essentially. Now, there are some variations, but generally the classical magic of the Renaissance centers around astrology. Astrology is the language of magic, and magic is the practical application of astrology. So, yeah.
Yeah. Where does man fit into the picture here?
Well, man is, yeah, and you'll find this in the Catechism, is the creature that is above beast and below angel. And what's interesting is that it's written And especially with these people, they believe specifically that man has the ability, when he's in his most pure state, to even be above angels, and in his worst state to be below creatures, because in many ways, many of these magicians, they knew the angels had their specific offices. Here's the thing: if you call a spirit for communication, or an angel of communication, that's their office. But if you want to work with that same angel for, like, let's say, alchemy, he probably wouldn't know it, because that's what makes an angel is their governing office. So in a lot of ways, man is more intelligent than angels, according to these uh, Renaissance people. And we should also know, but the angels were more intelligent in their specific field. That's why man called upon them. And when we look at this idea of man's position, man was this really goes back to the original sin, and that was when Eve bit off the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And this is important because even from the beginning in this mythology, we realize this one thing, that man has enough intelligence and reason, therefore, this brings about sin, which is what happened. And this is what the Elizabethans believed. And not just the Elizabethans, but people from the Dark Ages and Middle Ages. But the Renaissance people, they had a very interesting view on this. There was this perfect salvation, and there was this dichotomy of salvation and sin. And this was really important. And it was perfectly balanced. They were perfectly optimistic and also equally pessimistic, meaning that if you made a mistake, you made a really bad mistake, or if if you were saved, you were really saved. So, and it's really apocalyptic in nature too. When we look at Renaissance Hermeticism, it's apocalyptic. So everything has a beginning, everything has an end, and we measure this through Christianity. And I think that's what really separates this from classical Neoplatonism, because once you add in the theology and once you advance the world a little bit, these people, whenever they not just looked into uh, just nature and all that, but what is man's place in nature? It's a mixture of a Christian and Neoplatonic view overall. And when we look at this idea uh, of this whole thing, man, really, let's compare this to the modern view. In the modern view of occultism, what we have here is a view: I will to do this. I believe I can do this. I know I can do this. And there's not really much accountability unless you go far into other fields and into the universe. But it was different here. And why was this different? Because the only way that you could do magic and make change is not by your will. You're going to find in some of these prayers in the grimoires that it says, when you're praying to God, you know, that do this for me by your will, not mine, which is something that it comes from the Father prayer. But it's really interesting when we think about how these people thought. It it really have to look at the complex nature of how we saw ourselves, of how we saw redemption of the soul, of how we looked at the body. Um, even these philosophers and people believed that man's position in this was very simple, that we were separated from animals by our intelligence, and we were given this free will that was just like God's. And that's the thing. That's what that tree of knowledge possessed. So man was that middle nature. There was this idea of redemption, what some would call the philosopher's stone. And whether you look in a Neoplatonic idea of it, to where you are just put in this body and you have to get closer to the one, or you take the Christian approach to where, there's the original sin and you have to somehow transcend back to the righteous ways of God. This is really important. And in the West, this idea of redemption, man, I was ideal in this redemption. He was held above all earthly creatures. He was given reign of the world and the creatures. And the idea we could be saved was a big thing. So when we look at man's position, there were two things that also carried his magic: knowledge and his needs. So the more knowledge, and even purity, we can say three, because you had to purify out of your animal needs. And the Greeks called this purity. It was like an initiation in a way. So when we look at the Greek thought, just called purity, we go more into this Renaissance, and it almost had the same philosophy. Actually, if we look at this idea from the Greeks and the Christians, the idea of purity isn't much different. It's about controlling your senses, being aware of yourself, and not just being an animal relying on the senses. As a matter of a fact, you know, it was believed that if you didn't even know what was going on in astrology, that you were kind of a victim of it. Even in your own natal chart, if, let's say, your Saturn is really badly aspected, okay, you would counter that with something Jupiterian, or something solar like, as Marsilio Ficino would have mentioned, or even with the day. And once again, we have to separate astrology, which is what Liana Seif came up with, which is the worship of actual astrology. And then there's, you know, the actual astrology. So even though astrology was a part of it, there was this mixture so far of fate and free will. And even in the Picatrix, not the Picatrix, even in the Arbitel, it says somewhere along the lines that you can overcome these Olympic spirits, which are the seven planets, just by having a relationship with God, and you can overcome the ill fate that they have for you. So with man, that's pretty much a summary of his place in the world.
Yeah, and I also wanted to address this topic. We have a multi-layered perspective of of man and of reality. The thing is, yes, Christianity was at the forefront of the Renaissance perspective, and I do think it's important to internalize this worldview. But my thing is this: I think that it's impractical. Um, it's impractical, and I know that you're not suggesting that. No one, I'm not suggesting that. No one here is. But I just want people to understand that, well, basically, I think it's impractical to assume that someone has to be a Christian in order to do Renaissance magic, because there's a lot of paganism in there as well. The Corpus Hermeticum was huge, Neoplatonism. Basically, we have the one, and then we have spiritual creatures. And the thing is, the reason that Neoplatonism flourished so well is because there were a lot of similarities between Neoplatonism and Christianity. You had you had very similar ideas of purity and purification by fasting, by prayer and reason, or logos or intellect, basically overcoming the animal passions. Not that we can't enjoy things dealing with the passions, but that we are in control. Okay, I would say that at the center of the classical magical perspective of man is a type of self-overcoming. Okay, first of all, before we can be able to conquer the stars and begin to scale the chain of being, because Agrippa actually talked about using this as a type of ladder. Okay, of course, one can argue that he was talking about contemplation, from things here below up to above. And it's interesting that Plato in the Symposium, when he talks about love, which is what Plato's Symposium is about, he mentioned having a lover and experiencing beauty through that lover, and then begin to meditate on beauty in the world. And from beauty in the world, you can begin to contemplate the pure idea of beauty, the Platonic idea, simple, eternal, of which in the sublunary realm, these are just reflections. So basically, you can ascend the scale of being through contemplation. But there's another way. But before one can begin to scale the ladder of being, one needs to be able to overcome oneself. And this is when basically the intellect is able to overcome our animal passions. It's not saying that we can't enjoy things. It's saying that basically controlling our addictions to food, controlling our addictions to substances, being able to pull yourself out of bed. I mean, if you can't even get out of bed in the morning, then how are you going to scale the chain of being and become something more than you already are? In a sense, you have to be able to overcome your own issues, essentially. But man was seen as a perfect microcosm. And this is found in the Corpus Hermeticum. This is found throughout Platonic literature. And man was a perfect microcosm of the universe. There is an interrelationship. And again, I'm not diminishing, I'm by no means diminishing that, yes, Christianity did play a central role. All I'm saying is that there's lots of paganism in there as well. And I don't think it's essential that someone be a Christian to practice, because there's lots of paganism in there. You read the Picatrix, it has you praying directly to the planets. Marsilio Ficino worked with the Orphic hymns. But I am a traditionalist, and I personally do consider myself a magician that works within a very traditional, I guess you could say, Solomonic type of tradition. So Christianity does play a big role for me. But basically, I don't think you have to be any one religion, but essentially, there is an interrelationship between man, the universe, which is the world soul. The universe was seen as a living organism. The universe was a living being. The universe was literally a living organism in this classical model, which you see in Plato's Timaeus. It is a Platonic concept. And beyond the universe, a lot of New Age ideas or modern ideas are really just a watering down of classical magical concepts. For example, people today, they talk about the cosmic mind. Well, I believe in cosmic consciousness, and this is God. Well, it may be true, but in the classical magical mindset, cosmic mind or the universe as an organism was not God. First, there was the monad of Pythagoras, which Plato would see as the one or the good, which and Hermetism becomes much more deified, okay? And in the Hermetic writings, this one or this deity um, actually cares about us as a conscious living being, the divine nous, the divine mind, okay, and Hermetic thought. Basically, everything begins with the divine mind. The divine mind fashions the universe as a living organism, okay? This is the universal soul, what I guess in modern times we may call the cosmic consciousness, something like that. And then we have man. Now, the universe is a reflection of the divine. In Plato's Timaeus, the universe was fashioned after an eternal image, an eternal pattern. Now, what is this eternal pattern of Plato? This eternal pattern is the ideas in the divine mind. These are the Platonic ideas that stem from the one or the good. And then, so the universe is made in the image of God, and man is made in the image of the universe. Man is a perfect microcosm. And this is something that transcends the psychological model. This transcends and includes the psych model. The psychological model of magic, I think, is overly simplistic. And I think essentially it's an oversimplification, essentially, but this is transcended in the classical worldview, which is that man is a microcosm. All the planets, all the stars, all the zodiac, all things exist within mankind, within you. Okay? Now, this isn't saying that these are just parts of our mind. It's not saying that, not at all. It's saying that these things do exist outside of us as eternal realities. They also exist within. Okay? So to say it's all just within you is an imbalance. To say it's all without you is an imbalance. And this also goes back to as above, so below. Basically, within us we are a reflection of the cosmos. And this is something that you notice with grimoire magic. People that say that grimoire magic, dealing with planetary spirits, doesn't help spiritual growth are full of it. They don't know what they're talking about. When you work with a spirit of Venus or of Mars or Jupiter, you'll notice over time it begins to develop that part within you. Okay? If you work with Jupiter, you'll notice that beneficent quality within you starts to come out more. When you work with Mars, you see that you become more assertive over time. When you work with Venus, you get more in touch with that aspect of your being. So, like I said, this transcends the modern psych model or psychological model. It transcends it. It's not reducing it. It doesn't become a reductionism that this is just in my head, but it says that man is a reflection. We're based on the universal pattern. Now, if you can get man to reflect properly the macrocosm, then we can receive the spirit. We can become a vessel of power. Excuse me. We can become a vessel for the divine light. How do you become a vessel of the divine light? By becoming aligned with the macrocosm, the universe. And the more that you work with these planetary spirits, the more we're aligning ourselves to the macrocosm. So this is actually a mystical process in a sense. I'm not saying that overnight you're going to call in a spirit and then become enlightened. No, but it does help to bring out those qualities in one's nature. Because like I said, that we are based on the universal pattern. Imagine that we have the different strings of a harp within us, okay? And the universe is this giant harp. Now, if we call on one of the strings in the universe and pluck it, that string within us begins to be plucked as well. It begins to resonate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a beautiful image.
Yeah, and basically there is this celestial ascent. We see it in the Corpus Hermeticum, this ascent of the soul through the 7 planets. We see it in the writings of Macrobius. We see it in Cicero at the end of his De Republica. We see it hinted at the very end of Plato's Republic. We see this divine ascent. Some can say that it is hinted at in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, the Paradiso, ascending through the 7 heavens. The 7 heavens play a big role in Jewish magic. We have the Merkaba mysticism. If you take a look at the Tree of Life, it actually follows the Ptolemaic map of the universe. As we ascend through the Sephiroth, we're ascending the planets, we're ascending the scale of being, which is a whole other topic unto itself. But basically, I believe that working with astrological magic could become initiatory. It is this ascent. Now, there isn't a whole lot written about it, but I do think that this is basically the map of ascension is through the 7 planets and through the 8th sphere. This is talked about throughout the Corpus Hermeticum, and it's hinted at in the Tree of Life and elsewhere. The ascent of the soul. It's easier to unite with the ground of being when you are no longer tossed around by your lower nature. Essentially, it is, in the Platonic language, it is the liberation of intellect or nous from matter, basically from the passions. Okay, we're liberating the spiritual element from the animal. Basically, is this Platonic perspective. But yeah, man is the center because man is the microcosm. We are a reflection of the universe and of the divine. So these are really the 3 interacting links in a chain. Mankind, meaning the human being, the cosmos, which cosmos actually means order, and the divine nous.
So there's a sense of like a struggle within man to overcome his animal nature and unite with the divine in himself. And it seems to be that
Yes.
free will is the problem, but it's also the solution.
Yes, exactly. And it's not, again, it's not saying that you can't enjoy a good food. It's not saying you can't go and have some nice sex, or drink some wine and, get a little tipsy every now and then. It's not saying that. It doesn't mean you have to go sit on a mountain like some of these Hindu ascetics or this is a concept. Really, asceticism is found in many religions throughout the world. Buddhism, Hinduism, all throughout the world. Hermits living in a cave. It doesn't really require that. All it requires is that you are in control. You're not anyone that's had an addiction to something. They're not in control. They're being pulled around and they want to be free. They're crying out. Well, that's how the soul feels. It's crying out to be liberated, essentially. So here's a little practical thing that I do. Something that I do to make sure I don't get addicted to something, okay? Or really I do this with good food, anything. I flip a coin. And I make sure that I feel totally fine with either way the coin flips. So if I say, man, I'd really like a pizza. Well, I flip a coin. Should I or should I not? And I learn to totally feel fine either way. Now, if it lands on the proper thing, go pig out on some pizza, enjoy the hell out of it. Or if I want to go drinking at a bar and go party, and have fun, like I can do that. It's not saying I can't go, enjoy a drink or something, but flip a coin. Okay. It goes with anything where appetites could overcome the person. Try it with sex. You're in the mood for sex. How enslaved are we to sex? Okay, are we really in control? In other words, we can still enjoy sex. We can still enjoy food. We can still enjoy intoxication, but not being controlled by them. If you want to learn self-control, if you want sex, flip a coin and learn to say no to yourself. And that's really what it boils down to, is control. Who's in control here? Am I in control, or am I just basically being tossed around by my own whims?
Yeah,
So this is
it's almost
self-overcoming, self-mastery.
yeah, it's almost like this idea, and a quick synopsis, I think, and saying somewhere along the lines of slavery. Are you a slave to your emotions, or are your emotions or body or whatever a slave to you, or desires? And I think that's really important to ask. And you're right, it does take a lot of a thought with that. It does, and it is a lot of work. Me and Taliesin here, we've been, it's something we've been working on for a while now, especially here over the past month, trying to control certain impulses, but that's the thing is, a lot of, and this is, once again, I want to contrast this to modern ideology. A lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is based around you're free. You can do what you want. I don't even have to say the phrase to know who I'm referring to, but do as thou wilt. You know, and it's interesting because I think it's important to note that when we think about this, when we tell kids, nowadays, just give them a trophy, they participated. And I'm not going to go too deep in that, but this is reaching an end, to my point. What we're saying here is that do what you want, you can do anything that you want. And it's because of partially of this technology we have. It's partially because of the privileges that we have, and we're very lucky to have them, 100%. But we also have to understand we need to work within our boundaries and work within our strengths. We got thumbs so we could pick up chairs, but you can't ask a horse to pick up a chair. They don't have opposable thumbs, nor the body type to do it. So the thing is when you compare this to the classical, it wasn't just do what you want. It's do what you are capable of doing, and don't try to overextend. In a way, I like to call this Saturn. Each person has this Saturnine aspect. We have our boundaries. We have
limitation.
Yeah, we have our limitations because we're all different. Such as I'm not the same as you, Saroth, and I'm not the same as Taliesin, and Taliesin's not like me or you, and you're not like me or Taliesin. It's one of those things. We each have our own Saturnine aspects. And that's a really big part of this. Even though it's kind of funny because we don't like to be told no. And we're taught this as a kid. No. Don't do that. No, no, no. Or when people think of religion, thou shalt not, thou shalt not, thou shalt not. And I don't know what the cause and effect is, but like I said, essentially this old magic is about knowing your boundaries, knowing the boundaries of yourself. And I think me and Taliesin talked about this before in this old magic several times. Think of a gun, right? You want to shoot a target. Okay, so you have a choice, but you need to hit one exact spot in the target so you can get a bunch of rounds and put them in a shotgun and get some scatter rounds. But if you shoot it, yeah, you're going to hit the target, but your energy is scattered. But if you get a rifle and you aim just right, here's how I see it. The barrel is that Saturnine aspect, okay? And as you're looking through the Saturnine aspect, as soon as you pull the trigger with your will, now this barrel, you have to remember, it also symbolically represents, you're not shooting out of like 2 guns, you're not shooting out of 3 guns, you know your boundaries, you know your habits, you know who you are, you know what your strengths are, but you're not going outside of your strengths, you're not going outside of your natural talents. You're just sticking with what you're good at, and you aim, and then a bullet comes flying out of this barrel, and this barrel is aiming the bullet. This Saturn aspect, this discipline is aiming the bullet, and either you're going to hit your target or you're not. And here's how I kind of see it. I'm in the army, so that's sort of my own allegory towards this magic. For example, today it's taught that you can do any spell at any time. But if you go back then, especially during the Renaissance, sometimes the astrological timing was just simply a day and hour. Other times you had to check, is Mars squared, or is Saturn squared, or is there a planet opposed? So with this old magic, think of it like a gun. The barrel was meant to be more accurate. You don't dive into too many other things. You have a target, you aim for it. And that Saturnine aspect is so important with discipline, but too much Saturnine aspects lead to dogma. So, but here's the thing, once that round flies out of that round, it's in free air. And that's almost like your prayer. It's almost like whatever thing that you have that's Saturnine, it's going beyond the moon. It's going beyond the stars, and it's reaching the macrocosm. But let's say you don't focus on purity, right? And then that's almost like moving the barrel. You moved your discipline the other way and you missed your target. So that's how I like to describe this old magic.
That's one of the most important things I've learned from you is that single focus. I think I was spreading my energies way too wide, and now I've simplified things, and things seem to be happening again. And I think the simplicity of prayer is something that's really never really occurred to me when I was doing Golden Dawn magic or Thelema. The grimoire tradition has introduced a kind of simplicity and a purity and the idea of surrender, because I haven't attained my holy guardian angel yet, but I'm really striving towards it. And I think it's that aspect of, not trying to deliberately become a god like an Eekueting kind of thing, but surrendering yourself to the process and trusting in the process.
Absolutely. And this goes back to uniting above and below, uniting yourself. And what you're talking about control, this goes back to Plato's chariot allegory of the soul. Now, this is what the chariot card, if you really look at the chariot card, it's really just taking Plato's chariot allegory and putting it into a symbol, okay? The chariot card, look at that, and then you notice, especially in a lot of modern decks, you have a white horse and a black horse, and then go read Plato's chariot allegory. And Plato's chariot allegory of the soul, controlling the white and the black horse, have to do with basically controlling your own nature, your own passions, okay? And basically, we're pulled down to the earth because we can't control our horses. But if we can learn to control our impulses and self-direct, then we're able to, the chariot of the soul, we're able to scale the heavens, essentially. But something else that you talked about with control and not not moving beyond your bounds. Now, there is an upward movement. A scaling of the heavens, so to speak. Okay, that's different because we have that divine spark within us. That is part of our nature, is that divine spark. That's not moving beyond our bounds. But moving beyond our bounds in physical things, Someone that is handicapped trying to be a gymnast is not going to work. Someone that's got a horrible singing voice is not going to be an opera singer. Okay. It's just that this all goes back to, in the classical worldview, you'd say it goes back to your natal chart. Okay. Everything springs from your natal chart. Even your angel, or your angel of your nativity, springs from your chart. Your natal chart, basically, you can correct your natal chart. I think that this is an important thing to go into, is that part of talismanic magic and all of that is correcting the unlucky aspects of one's chart. For example, in my chart, my Jupiter is combust with my sun, and my Jupiter is in its detriment or fall, basically. So I've had a lot of unlucky situations in my life. And of course, I'm not blaming astrology, but I could see a correlation there. Why? As above, so below. At least in my own experience. No, I'm not trying to pass off a dogma or say this is the way it is, but ultimately we can only go by our own experiences, as well as the, reading books and listening to others. And by our own experiences, we could either experience something ourselves or learn it. But in my own experience, astrology, I very strongly believe in it. By my experiences, logically, I can't wrap my head around it. Logically, it makes no sense. Why would a star cause this? It makes no sense logically. But after watching it and looking at it and examining, based on personal observation and experience, it seems to be correct again and again and again. I don't know why it works, but it works. But basically, in this example, you can bring in more Jupiter to correct that. Okay, it'll make a life a lot simpler, a lot easier. Or Marsilio Ficino talked about working with things in your chart that are promising. Bring even more of that in to accentuate it. And you can do this through talismans and other things. Now, I think it's important for the people to understand that the world is a talisman. Ultimately, this sublunary realm is a giant talisman. It is a reflection of the celestial realm and the divine ideas through the seminal reasons and the soul of the world, the universal soul. The world is a talisman, essentially. According to this classical model, like I said, every color, just take every color. There's seven rays that we can observably see in the spectrum. Okay, there's 7 rays in the light spectrum that we can perceive with our eyes. Okay, each one of these is associated with a planet. So basically, if you just take color, look around. If you're sitting in your car, look outside your window, or if you're in your home, look around you right now, wherever you are, whether you're listening to the podcast or whether you're one of us interviewers, just look around. You see something green? Well, that's associated with Venus. You see something red? Well, that's reflecting the ray of light associated with Mars. You see something brown, you could associate that with kind of a kind of a Saturnine type of thing. Okay, so basically just colors. Everything around you is associated with a planet. Objects by their function. A clock shows time. It measures time, and time is a boundary. So this is a Saturn. If you see a clock, anything electronic, you could say that the electronic aspect is Mercury. Or let's say you take a tree, the moisture of the tree, the moisture in its leaves, everything is the moon. Its roots are associated with Saturn. Its leaves are Mercury. It has all these qualities within it anything that you look at. You put peppers in your food, that's Mars. Onions, that's Mars. You put cream, that's associated with the moon. You eat some chicken or something, okay? Assuming you're not a vegetarian, you eat some chicken. Well, that's solar. So basically, we have a moving symbolic picture. Now, I'm not saying it's just symbolic. I'm not saying that. But I think at some level it is. But I think that I do believe that some of these things actually have the qualities in them, definitely. But basically, everything around you has an astrological correspondence. Now, if you meditate on this, I mean contemplate on this daily, if you really internalize this, you're internalizing the language of magic. And I recently had kind of a minor mystical experience with this. I was driving in my car, or rather, I was a passenger in the car, and I was looking at the road. Well, that's movement, that's Mercury. I looked at a speed limit sign. Well, that speed limit, that is a restriction, which is Saturn, but it's the law, which is Jupiter, but it's written. It's written, which is associated with Mercury. I see a red light. Red is Mars, but it's stopping everything. That's Saturn. Green, okay, we're going. Green associated with Venus and movement. I guess you could say the expansion of Jupiter. Turn on the radio. It's like some, like rock music. It's angry. Well, that's very Mars-like. Turn on some classical. It's very noble and lofty. Well, that's very Jupiterian. And then a love song comes on. Well, there's Venus. So basically, when you begin to look at everything and see its astrological correspondence, the world becomes a moving symbolic picture. And I cannot even express this in words. And I cannot even begin to express the importance of this. This is subjective synthesis. I don't fully agree with Lazowski. I have a little bit of a different view of subjective synthesis. For me, subjective synthesis is exactly this. You are internalizing. You are literally writing astrology as a symbol structure upon your brain. You're moving around in a world of astrology. And basically you're learning, you're internalizing this type of map upon your mind, basically your consciousness. And this is a way of imprinting your mind with the astrological worldview. Now, Marsilio Ficino, his 3 books on life. Book 1, he talks about the problem of scholars. Scholarship, studying, contemplation, that is a very Saturnine thing. But what else does Saturn rule? Melancholy, depression. And this is something that a lot of thinkers notice, that they think a lot, and it's like, oh, I'm thinking too much, I'm depressed, or whatever. Yeah. So Ficino says that such people should go out into a green field, because green is associated with Venus. They should drink sweet wines. Sweet things are associated with Jupiter. They should handle gold. I mean, if you're wealthy enough to just handle gold, you could tell he was really appealing to a rich audience. I don't think the town drunkard exactly can just reach and just handle some gold when he's feeling sad, but that's what Agrippa says. Handle gold. He doesn't just say to handle or be around these things, but to contemplate them. If you want to bring in more sun, associate with a buddy that's got blonde hair. That blonde hair could be seen as solar. Go hang out with them. Whatever. Eat foods associated with that planet. If you want to be more assertive, eat more peppers. Now, it's not saying that scientifically, if you eat peppers, you'll be more assertive. It's not saying that. But if you fully integrate the symbol system, it will. And I'm not saying that this is just the psych model. I'm not. I have a lot of issues with the psychological model of magic, because it can often become reductionistic. Oh, the spirit is just a part of my psyche. No, but I think it plays a role. It's just one part of a bigger picture. Is a psychological perspective. If you want to be more assertive, no, peppers aren't just going to make you more assertive. But if you have internalized the symbol structure and you eat peppers knowingly what it embodies, and you focus upon this as a type of sacrament, okay, once this symbol structure is internalized, you can just begin getting around things associated with the sun or Venus or or whatever, Jupiter, which is a very lucky planet, and things will begin unfolding for you. I just wanted to, I'm looking here, Ficino, this is The Book of Life by Marsilio Ficino. He says here that the Pythagoreans, at least, of course, this is his interpretation. I'm not saying it's literally true, but he said that the Pythagoreans were extremely cautious that too much philosophizing would bring in too much tyranny of Saturn. So they dressed up in white garments and each day sang songs and made music of Jupiterian and Apollonian things. And in this way, they lived a long life. So they were bringing in, just by doing things like that, things that were associated with Jupiter or whatever. So he says here, basically, when you do things, it says here, very often, therefore, human affairs, people become more subject to Saturn, the more Saturnine things you do. Now, this is a totally revolutionary way to think about planetary magic. The more Saturnine things you engage in, the more you bring in its power over you. So theology, philosophy, he says superstition, magic, agriculture, and through sadness, engaging in these activities bring in more Saturn, okay? But if you engage in civil and ambitious business, and through natural and common philosophy and through civil religion and laws, we bring in more Jupiter. If you allow yourself to watch war movies, you bring in more Mars into yourself. Or if you listen to music and surround yourself with beautiful things, you bring in more of the influence of Venus. So once this has been internalized as a symbol structure, as I said, I mean literally, as you're driving your car, as you're eating your food, look at what you're eating. Now, this requires memorizing correspondences. And what I recommend people do is get 7 index cards. Index cards, like you write on to memorize things. And get Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. Open your book to Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, book 1, chapters 23 through 28 list all the correspondences, a lot of correspondences associated with the 7 planets. So Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, book 1, chapter 23, goes over all the correspondences of the sun. It tells you what animals, what stones, what plants, what elements, everything. Okay, basically, I encourage people to get index cards, crack open Agrippa, and write down these correspondences. Again, for viewers out there, this is Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, book 1, chapters 23 through 28. And it's like a page. We'll list all the correspondences. Write these down, memorize them. I mean, memorize them. These need to be internalized so that you can begin looking at the world through this lens. But yeah, the more that Ficino even says thinking about gold, contemplating lofty things brings in more sun and Jupiter. So yeah, this all goes in, and this is learning essentially the language of magic. And the one thing that I wanted to say beyond that is that this all happened through the universal soul, the soul of the world. The universal soul, or soul of the world, according to Ficino, is what connects us to the planets and us to each other. So you could say, well, what connects me to that star out there? Okay. Now, some of the Arab astrologers, like in the Picatrix, they would say, well, it's the rays. But according to Ficino, no. This is the world soul. And when I say world, I'm talking about the universe, because it includes all the planets and constellations and stars. World equals universe here. The world soul, or universal soul, is what makes magic work. It's how you can affect someone on the other side of the earth. What connects you? I mean, is it a wind? Are you going to do a spell and then a wind flies from you and hits them or something? No, it's not some kind of a mystical wind. What connects you is the world soul. You're connected. The world soul, that the universe is a living being and we all exist within it. The world soul is basically what connects us to each other and to events. And this is at the root of magic, is the world soul is crucial, which again, that's one of those little missing pieces of the puzzle that you don't see in modern magic.
Yeah, I'm seeing a connection here between like the connection between the world soul and the connection that we now have through digital technology, which I guess you could say is mercurial in nature. It's made the world a lot smaller.
Yep, without a doubt. I'm sorry, I just lost connection. I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that real quick?
Yeah, I just said like the world soul could be said to be operating through like the digital technology we've got now. I mean, I would have never been able to speak to you guys 10 years ago, you know? And I think that's got a lot to do with what I see as like a modern magical renaissance, where texts that we could have never got before are becoming available. And the whole world of magic seems to be going back to this earlier model. I don't know if it's just a current or, you know, maybe Theophilos has some ideas on that.
Very much so, but I'd like to amend something that I think is really fun, especially for those with an Android phone, and me and Taliesin have been doing it. I've been doing it for a couple of years, so it's kind of wild. Now that I look back, it's, you know, how you do something and you don't realize the impact of it till later. But we got this app called Planetary Hours, and it's really neat because it goes like Saturn time. It actually is called Planetary Times, yeah. And what's really neat is now when we're conversing, whenever there's a segue and we're talking about something within the planetary hours, the conversation, even without thinking about it, will switch to it. And then the phone will go off and like say Jupiter time, Mars time. We just
It's planetary times is the name of the
yeah,
app.
planetary times, yeah.
Got a purple icon, planetary times.
We had a problem with someone like just within the last 10 minutes earlier today, and then as soon as we just segued, it said Jupiter, I mean sun time. You know, it just switched over to sun time, and that was after the event happened. And there's this synchronicity with the planetary times that we are unaware of, and it's so neat. uh, there was a time that my mother called, right? And at the time that she called, my phone switched off to what was it, moon time, and the moon represents your mother in astrology. I'm like, wow, and yeah, and that is one really good exercise too. But what was your original question?
I was just relating the world soul to digital technology. A bit of a tangent.
Oh, dude,
Yeah.
let me say this real. Let me
Yeah.
say this real quick, man. That Yeah, that planetary app is called Planetary Times. And I've used lots of different apps for planetary hours. And of course, I also make them by hand, usually to check an app. When I get an app, usually I do the planetary hours by hand and then check it against that. But basically, I've used Chronos XP, I've used planetary hours or PH Pro, all this. But this particular app, Planetary Times, it actually has a voice feature. Like, as long as your ringer's on, it'll say Mercury hour, like in your pocket. Dude, it is wild. I've been using this. It's like someone will call and then, hey, how you doing today? And they'll say Mercury hour. Or I'll just get into an argument. Oh, to hell with you. And I looked and it'll just said Mars hour. Like, it is really wild. And I've noticed the really trippy thing. You would think that it's somewhere in the middle of it. Like, if it was a coincidence, it'd be in the middle of it, right? But no, a lot of times it's right when it switches. It's almost like a rush of energy. I encourage people to download this app and just try it out as an interesting exercise. Just notice what things go on during the planetary hour. It's really interesting. Again, it's a purple icon. If you have an Android, like Theophilos and I, it's called Planetary Times, and yeah, you can turn on the voice feature. It's actually pretty wild experiment to check it out.
Yeah.
I've got it, but mine says planetary hours, so I'm just wondering, it doesn't seem to have a voice thing either, so maybe I've got a slightly different app. So should we maybe go on to some of the praxis about how someone perhaps just starting off in Renaissance classical magic could get a start?
Yeah, could I start this one off? I wanted to go into one of the simplest method. I think that it's good to begin at the most simple, and then we can build in complexity, okay? Because lots of people, especially new students, they're like, how do I make classical magic work? And you're like, oh, well, you have a sword, and you have astrology, and you have all these things, and circles, and all of these tools, Grand Pentacle of Solomon, and their heads just spinning like, okay, that's overwhelming. I don't know how to make that work. So I think it would be good for us to go over the simplest methods that require virtually no tools. Okay? The simplest methods that require virtually no tools at all. So one of the simplest methods, and it is traditional, is found in the Picatrix. And really, the only thing is the Picatrix, even though this was an Islamic grimoire, I would say this is more of a pagan-friendly approach for people that maybe they're looking for more of a way that's open towards being a pagan, because there's a large pagan community that wants to get into this stuff. If you're pagan and you're like, where are all the pagan grimoires? Even though it is an Islamic grimoire, it's medieval. It's even pre-Renaissance. It's like, what, 10th century? But yeah, the Picatrix, basically, during the planetary day and hour, or really you can scrap the day. The hours are more important. During the planetary hour, during a good astrological time. Now, we really don't have time to go into astrological elections. Astrological elections, or electional astrology, is finding the good time to do something. Okay, so astrological elections means what you're looking for. I don't know. We can go into it here in a minute if we have time. We can go into things like avoiding Algol, which is the demon star, or we can go into all that aspects, all that. But at its basic, during a good time, which we can go into if you want, during a good time, you face the planet, you burn an incense of the planet, and you recite your prayer. That is as easy as it gets. Face the planet, burn an incense of the planet. That's correspondences, say a prayer. That's found in the Picatrix. The Picatrix also says to wear the color, put on clothing of the color of the planet. So if you're working with Saturn, wear black. If you're working with Mars, wear red. If you're working with Jupiter, wear that color. Basically, have the color, face the planet. There are apps. There's an app called Sky Map. It's really awesome. And Sky Map, basically, you can see where everything actually is. But basically, you face the planet, burn the incense associated with the planet, say a prayer. Now, if you have a talisman, you can hold that talisman in the incense smoke while saying the prayer. So it's really interesting. Now, Marsilio Ficino, he was a Christian, but he was also a Neoplatonist. He used the Orphic hymns. So if you want to know a very simple way to work with traditional, classical, the real deal, Renaissance magic, okay? And this really goes back to late antiquity. And again, this is one of those things that are more pagan friendly. Basically, you burn the incense of the planet during the proper timing and recite the Orphic hymn of the planet. If you're doing a talisman, hold the talisman over the incense while reciting the Orphic hymn. Now, that's the simplest. You can build complexity. Now, what I said, that can just be used by itself. That could be it if you want. That can just be it. But if you say, Taliesin, I'd really like something more complex than that. Okay, so what can I do? Well, you could add in numbers and colors. Green is for Venus, okay? According to Agrippa. Actually, if you're familiar with the Tree of Life, Agrippa uses the same numbers for the planets. So that's, if you already have the Tree of Life memorized, you've already got Agrippa's numbers. Not the squares, but the base numbers. So 3 is Saturn, 4 is Jupiter, 5 is Mars, 6 is the Sun, 7 is Venus. So anyways, Venus, take 7 green candles. Anoint them with rose oil, because rose is sacred to Venus. Burn a Venus incense. Have a copper talisman, that's her metal, during the day and hour of Venus, when Venus is at least free of affliction in the heavens. And basically recite the Orphic hymn to Venus, hold your talisman in the incense smoke. Or just recite the Orphic hymn and then state your intention, okay? And it's really interesting because this is basically a very simple form of magic. It's almost like you see in Wicca or Hoodoo, but it's adding actual classical correspondences of Agrippa, and it uses this model. Now, in the New Age, people often talk about, this stone is good for healing, or this stone is really good for getting rid of dark thoughts, or whatever. Okay, this stone is good for healing the past, whatever. Well, why does it work? Why does this herb, when you burn it, bring prophecy? Well, this is all explained in the Renaissance system that I think people have lost touch with. The classical system, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, basically, this is based on the 3 worlds. This is a planetary magic. So yeah, now, if you're working with actual spirits and summoning them before you, use a circle, period. And it's not that what you're calling is going to hurt you. That's wrong. People have this idea that use circles because you don't want what you're calling to hurt you. No, it's all the other stuff you'll attract. When you call on a spirit, you're drawing other things in the atmosphere to you. It's like moths to a flame. So unless you want a bunch of astral nasties around, don't do it. Use a circle is my advice. Now, it's interesting, the word astral, we say the astral plane, comes from basically the Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky. It means astrological. It means of the stars. And it shows that even in the Theosophical, Blavatsky type of occultism, the astral plane, this terminology stems from the Renaissance and classical worldview or world picture, that above the elementary realm is the celestial realm of astrology. But yeah, now circles are not just an energy field around you. Here's the thing. In the modern New Age, and here's the thing. I'm not trying to be a jerk to anyone. I'm not even trying to say that anyone's wrong. But I'm stating my own opinion and the classical perspective. A circle is not just you visualize a ball of light around you. Here's the thing, and it's a really good question. If you can just visualize a ball of light, why do you not think that a spirit that's more powerful than you, that could actually change world events, why do you think that spirit can't unvisualize it? It's like, I'm going to visualize a circle of light and call on a hostile being. You don't think that spirit could visualize too? Yeah, a circle is something that's marked in the ground with basically protective names, is part of this technology. It is essential to the technology is protective names. Or in the very least, if you look at some of the real old classical stuff, even if the name isn't there, it was cut into the ground with a sharp object, usually made of iron. Now, iron is said to disrupt magnetic energy fields of spirits, all of that. Now, that's a whole other topic, but I just want to emphasize that at least in the classical worldview, a circle was not an energy field. This is something that was taken from the Key of Solomon by Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner took this from the Key of Solomon, and so did the Golden Dawn, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. They took this idea of circles from the Solomonic magic, and they turned it into energy fields. But this is, now it's not saying you can't add energy. I have a circle marked on the ground, and just to be extra careful, I then push energy around it. And there is some precedent for that. And Trithemius is drawing spirits into crystals, which it's debatable whether that's a real classical text. It doesn't appear until Francis Barrett's The Magus. But anyways, as long as you're not calling on a specific spirit to like appear before you, I think it's fine. But I think if you're going to start calling on particular entities to come stand before you, like in the incense smoke, and if you're trying, okay, I just want to say there is a big difference between praying to Saturn and trying to make a spirit materialize in the incense smoke. That is a serious operation. And no telling what it looks like on the astral plane. It's probably like sparks flying and all kinds of stuff. Now, if you see a bunch of fireworks down the street, what are you going to do? You're going to say, what's that? Okay, I mean, it's just common sense. So I just want to emphasize protection if you're going to deal with an actual spirit. That's kind of a long digression. So basically, this magic could be very simple. All I say is, for the Picatrix or Orphic hymns, that's fine. But if you're going to call on an entity and try to manifest it in incense smoke, I just think it's a good idea to have a circle. But yeah, that is the most basic. And from more of a Christian perspective, the arbitel also gives a very easy method. The arbitel requires no tools. And Theophilos and I have used the arbitel with no tools with success. But the arbitel is based around personal purity. Okay, it's a very Christian form of magic. It's based on your closeness to the divine and purity. Reading scripture, the arbitel is a very spiritual text. So don't think that you can just sit there and, live a corrupt life and think you're going to be protected. Your protection comes from being a spiritual person, basically, with the arbitel. In that sense, it's very similar to the Abramelin in the sense of personal purity playing a role and being protective. But basically, there are simple methods. For a more Christian approach, the arbitel, and if you want a more pagan-friendly approach, I would recommend reading. If you have the Picatrix. I don't know what chapter it is in Dana Trell's, but in John Michael Greer and Christopher Warnock's Picatrix, it's book 3, chapter 7, gives very clear instructions on how you can do planetary magic, real classical planetary magic, with simple incense and prayer. So yeah, the Picatrix, if you want a pagan-friendly method, and the Orphic hymns. And a more Christian perspective, I'd say the Arbatel, and those are the simplest. And if you want, we could also go into more of the elaborate methods like other grimoires. It's really up to you.
Yeah, well, I'd be interested to know. There seems to be two schools of thought going on at the moment. You've got like your Stephen Skinners, who are very into like binding the spirits and being quite harsh almost with them. And then you've got other magicians who say, oh no, you can you don't have to threaten them. They'll do what you want if you just give them offerings. And, where do you stand on that? I think you err on the side of caution, don't you?
Oh, well, that's okay, this is something that I think really needs to be addressed. Okay, it really depends on what you're working with, first of all. Sublunary spirits were not usually worked with in that realm. Now, in this model, everything beneath the moon was imperfect and changeable, the realm of strife, okay? Everything, the moon and above, was perfect. Now, sometimes the planets can go retrograde. They can be malefic. But basically, you're dealing with entities that don't wish you any harm, essentially. Now, Agrippa says that the spirit and the intelligence, the spirit is the evil one, or evil spirit. I don't know. In my experience, usually spirits that are astrological, meaning from the moon and up, don't seem to really wish us harm. But here's the thing. Other spirits can come in because they're attracted to your ritual. And there's a big difference between just having a picture and lighting a candle and leaving a drink and trying to make a spirit manifest in incense smoke. I mean, just imagine if you want your house haunted, try to start manifesting spirits in your living room and incense smoke. That is just a disaster waiting to happen. Now, some people, they say, I've done it for years and no problem. Well, my dad's 70 and he still smokes. That doesn't mean that you're harsh or you curse or any of that. It doesn't mean that either. You should always be respectful. Just because you're working with a spirit that could be malevolent or hostile, that doesn't mean that you have to enter in with curses and all that. Really, the Ars Goetia, you have a bunch of like really pleasant conjurations until you get to the last one. Like it gets harsher and harsher because it's not coming. But that's really not typical in grimoires. Usually grimoires are much friendlier than that. So that is not the norm. So people tend to have this idea that magicians are out telling, come into this triangle and do this for me, or I'm gonna slap your mama or something. And that's just not how it is. I think that's a misconception. Like I said, the Ars Goetia does have some really harsh conjurations, but that's really not the norm. If you're working with an archangel of the sun, Saint Michael or something, right? You don't need to be protected from Saint Michael. But it's still good to have a circle because other things may be attracted to your ritual. You can give offerings, but I'd give an offering with a good circle. I'll put it that way. You could still give a nice little drink offering, and you could still be nice and make a nice petition. But I would use a circle. I mean, so that's like a happy medium, right? It's like not one extreme or the other. You can offer a drink offering and say, hey, do you mind doing this? But that's you also being protected at the same time.
I think that's absolutely fascinating, and I mean, before I really got friendly with Theophilos, and kind of now through you, a lot of my friends were telling me, "Oh no, no, these guys aren't demons; they're just old gods, and they're fine, and they're totally safe to work with, and don't worry." And it's got me thinking: are they? And is there any real point in working with demons when we could be working with angels? Although maybe the angels won't give you the instant results that the demons will.
Yeah, I've heard that argument many times over the years. It's a very common thing that people say nowadays. And I'm not condemning those people by any means, but sometimes you have to state your own opinion. They have no opinion stating their opinion. I mean, they have no problem saying what they think. They have no problem stating their opinion. So they have their opinion, and that's fine. And this is my opinion. I personally, I think they're wrong, and that's just my honest view.
So, Theophilus, what do you make of this conversation?
No, I think I would agree with most of it, I think that, like I said, my perspective, I would say, is very similar to Taliesin's, really. It's I've had horrible experiences with lower level spirits and sublunary spirits as well. I try to avoid those for the most part. I mean, I think that they can be useful because they're a part of creation, just as the Arbitel states. But for even they have their virtues. Otherwise, I don't think that they would be able to be used.
Okay. What would we like to go into next? Anything that you'd like to bring up, Theophilus, or
I think we covered a lot of it.
Well, I want to go a little bit into the more elaborate methods because we went into a really simple method. If that's cool with y'all.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So, Theophilus, do you want to take this? Or should I start?
I'll let you take it.
Okay. Well, at its most simplest, you light an incense, you face the planet, you say a prayer. Very basic. During the proper timing, of course. If you want to get more elaborate, it's a good idea to have some kind of a circle. Now, how do you make a circle? Well, the Key of Solomon says to carve it into the earth with a consecrated black-handled knife or with a sword, okay? But what if you can't carve it into the earth? What if you can't do that? There is some precedent for using consecrated paper. As odd as it may sound, there is some precedent for using consecrated paper.
How would you consecrate paper?
Well, okay, well, it's found in some of the Faustian grimoires, which I'm not really an expert in, but I know it appears in there. And also Dr. Rudd mentions using consecrated paper. So it's very common in the grimoire, in the traditional grimoire community, to use canvas. Go get a giant canvas and do your circle. I've also seen it where people get poster board and people are like, is that really traditional? Well, there's a precedent for it in the grimoires to use paper, and basically it's a paper product. Some people use cloth. I don't like to do that because it just wrinkles so easily unless you use some kind of fabric that doesn't wrinkle. But basically what I personally like to do is, okay, what do you make it out of? Some people like to use chalk. Now you can use chalk on wood or concrete or something. Chalk, the Feast of Epiphany in the Catholic Church and some traditional Catholic churches, you can get church chalk. Very effective. Joseph Lazuski mentions this. Also, charcoal is very common for making a black, dark color. Charcoal blended with holy water is what I normally use to make the circle. I usually do the circle of consecrations, which has 4 divine names and either 4 pentagrams or 4 hexagrams dividing the names. So you have your circle. That is the basic element of protection. Next thing for protection is a sword. Now, the sword should be carbonized steel. It should not be stainless steel because that really works with the chemical makeup. carbonized steel sword, sharpen it. Steel is an alloy of iron, and iron is said to interact with a spirit. It's electromagnetic energy, I guess. So if you swipe an iron at a spirit, it's believed to actually harm it. And this is a very ancient concept. The PGM, 2,000 years ago, the Greek magical papyri mentions iron as being protective. And again, some people believe, speculate that it interacts with their electromagnetic field. So yeah, a steel sword, if something comes after you, you can swipe it with that sword. We know this one occultist, it's really funny. She has Solomonic throwing knives.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's not that you're hateful to the spirits. I think that there's this perception in the occult community. So I want to make it very clear. You're not protecting yourself from what you call necessarily. You're protecting yourself from all the other stuff. This is protective equipment, like wearing a hard hat, for if you're trying to get a spirit to manifest right in front of you, face to face, an instant smoke or something, okay? You talk about a house getting haunted, start trying to manifest spirits in your living room. Anyways, yeah, bad idea. But the circle, the sword, it's just for protection. Okay, if anything goes bad, you have that.
Self-defense.
Yeah, so it's like a shield and sword, basically. So yeah, but and then there's also the Grand Pentacle of Solomon. This is the third level of protection. If you read the Heptameron, it's like a hexagram, and it says like expus or whatever. But really, it's Greek letters. The X is a K. P is actually an R. The U is E. It actually says basically Christ. Basically, is what it says. But it looks like in English letters, we think it says expus. You see it in Heptameron in a hexagram. It's called the Grand Pentacle of Solomon. It's the most common protective amulet you see in the grimoires. You see it in the Book of Oberon. The Book of Oberon. You see it in the Cunning Man's Grimoire, recently published by Stephen Skinner. You see it in the Heptameron, the Key of Solomon. This is called the Grand Pentacle of Solomon. It is protective. So what do you make it out of? Of course, I'm going off real quick here. I think it's good. It depends on your ethics. Some people would never use an animal product, and that's fine. That's your ethics. If you want to be really traditional, goat skin parchment can be found on Etsy. Now, what do you make it out of? Some people would use ink. But if you really want to be traditional, the Rabbi Solomon, you see it, in the Abognazar version of the Key of Solomon. The Abognazar, Sloan manuscript 1203, I believe. It mentions making it out of gold. Okay? Now, you can get 24 karat gold leaf paper. Not paper. You can get 24 karat gold leaf, mix it with gum arabic and holy water, and you've got 24 karat gold ink, and you can make it with that. Then you have your Grand Pentacle of Solomon that protects you. You have your circle, your sword. You could go on and make the bloodstone amulet. You just get a little Dremel or something and make the little symbol like you see in De Secretis or in the Universal Treatise version of the Key of Solomon. Put your initials in there. That's also protective. Those are some of the protective equipment. Now, in an operation, normally you take a bath. That was something kind of novel in the Renaissance. You take a bath, recite Psalm 51, enter your circle, sprinkle it with holy water, reciting Asperges me domine hisopod mundabor lavabis me supernivum de albabor. It's Psalm 51, verse 7, I think. It's a common formula for asperging. And then I like to actually trace. The circle is on the ground, but I like to actually trace it with energy. I do. I guess it's a habit, and it's also found in Tritemius. I trace the circle, name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, and then I, basically, if I have a scrying crystal, I like to have a table of practice. Man, I'm kind of going all over the place, but it is complex. I said I was getting complex, and here it is. Having a scrying crystal, it's good to have a table of practice. It's called a locus spiritus. It's something for the spirit to manifest in. Now, tables of practice, like if you look at the Almadel of Solomon made out of beeswax, you can get 100% beeswax on eBay.
I have some.
Awesome. Melt it down. I like to use a slow cooker. It has to be really slow, or it can discolor the wax. You can discolor the wax real easy. Oh, Lord, I guess y'all can hear my dogs back here. Anyways, hold on. Hey. All right. Anyways, so you got your table of practice, and you can put a circle and a triangle in there. And again, that kind of keeps the spirit from coming out of the circle or out of the scrying stone. Remember that that experience that I told you about, that the spirit could come through the scrying crystal. So that's part of the reason for having the spiritus loci is or the locus spiriti, actually, the location for the spirit to manifest. The table of practice is a good thing to have. So basically, have your scrying crystal on your table of practice. You're in your circle, and during the proper timing, you call on whatever spirit. You burn its incense. You do your conjurations. The spirit comes. It manifests, and then basically you have your interaction. Give the license to depart. We do not banish. There's no banishing. That is a totally new concept. And then you, after you give the license to depart, I like to sprinkle again with holy water. So if you want a really simplified method of that, read Tritemius's Drawing Spirits into Crystals. Basically, you have your circle, you have your scrying stone outside the circle. Really simplified version. Trace your circle. Call on I would bless the scrying stone, call on the spirit, have your interaction, give a license to depart. And then, so basically, there's the purification. You have your bath, you sprinkle all the equipment with holy water. That's the first step, purification. Second step is calling. I like to trace a circle here. Calling. Then you have your interaction, and then you release. I think as long as you have some kind of a circle, you should be good. As long as you have a circle and some holy water, you should be good. So yeah, just experiment with it, try it out. And that's basically it.
I have a question. I have a circle drawn in my living room. Is it really a good idea to be evoking spirits into the place where you live and you sleep? Or is it, not everyone can have a separate temple, of course, but I mean, even I'm just a little bit concerned that there might be like stuff running around my house all the time.
Oh, yeah, your house will get haunted. It'll happen. Poltergeist activity, it happens. Of course, if it gets too far out of hand, then you have to do something about it. To me, it's going to happen, man. I mean, there's no way around the poltergeist. I mean, especially if you do operations all the time, poltergeist activity is gonna happen. But if it gets out of hand, that you have to do something. But basically, I think as long as the area is clean, you don't want you just want the area to be clean and basically clear of other stuff. That is the whole diet. What is purity? Purity is to make it one single thing. What do you say if something is pure sugar? It means that it's sugar not mixed with anything else. So part of purity, if you use your living room, I would remove, you don't want a Pink Floyd poster there, or just family photos all sitting around, and a TV guide. Well, people don't use those anymore. You get the picture. Giant
Yeah.
Christmas tree right outside the circle. I mean, basically, as long as it's cleared of other things. Now, very common in the grimoires, you want to avoid any statues with faces, um, any ornate furniture with faces, or anything like that can, because that stuff can kind of drive you nuts when you're working with a grimoire. You can start seeing these things. So you see that in the Key of Solomon, um, the Rabbi Solomon. You see it in Welcome Manuscript 4670. It mentions not having anything with like pictures of faces, and I haven't. I experienced some of it, but I don't think it's too much of an issue. The key is just not to get too. You want to focus on your operation and not let, how do I put it, disturbances disturb you from what you're trying to do. Basically, you don't want any distractions. And if your imagination starts seeing things everywhere, it's better to just be one focused and focus on what you're doing. Sometimes I think spirits use things in order to distract you.
I think I might have to rethink my temple arrangements.
Theophilos, you got kind of quiet over there.
Yeah, I was listening.
Yeah, so what do you think, Theophilos, about what do you think is this? How would you approach grimoire magic? Really want to hear your perspective on this, or what do you think is what is something that someone can go home? How can I use this? How can I make magic happen? Or what can I do to try this out as an experiment? Let's talk about a practical experiment, because it's one thing listening to a podcast and it's like, oh, that was informative. But if there's an experiment you can try, what do you think, man?
Well, if I have to say anything, I always believe in starting off kind of slow. Um, First and foremost, for example, even before you get into ritual magic or any ceremony, I there's that Saturnine aspect, and we have to discipline ourselves. I mean, I think that for like a month or two, that a person should just practice daily prayer in whatever their faith is. I
Yeah,
think that's really
I agree.
helpful. And once once you're used to prayer and you're used to and plus memorizing them, not just saying it, but memorizing it. It doesn't matter if it's a Buddhist mantra or like, 100 Hail Marys or the some of the or like the Apostles' Creed, whatever prayer that you want to use. And you know and prayer is like the most base of all of it. Then you build your way up, and like you mentioned, the grimoires that don't require tools, like the Arbitel, a prayer. Essentially, I don't think it was meant to be prayer based because there were 8 other books, but and they never seen the light of day. But essentially, it just ended up being a prayer sort of grimoire. And I think a person, they should study. And this is my recommended sort of 18-month thing. I think a person, they should be doing simple stuff for at least 18 months. And it may seem kind of slow, but it's a matter of building up discipline. And with this, I always recommend, so I like sort of reading the base text, such as Agrippa, um, you know, a way to get yourself into the view, the Elizabethan worldview, the Catechism, the 3 dialogues of Plato that I mentioned earlier. Some of the core books while memorizing these prayers, and then you could like sort of go to the Divine Cabal, and once you get to the Divine Cabal, then you can make your wax tablet, and that's sort of an upgrade from the um, Arbitel. And once again, you still have to memorize these psalms. You still have to memorize these prayers, just like the the project we're doing with the archangels, I mean, you recite some psalms 7 times. There's 2 psalms you recite 7 times, and then you go and you recite these other grimoire psalms 7 times. And I think it should be a gradual build-up process. And I think when you're going through the lore and when you're slowly building up, let's say your purity, your energy field, whatever you want to call it, I don't know, your astral body, I have no clue what you want to call it. But once you kind of inflame yourself in that, then I think you're ready for the hard stuff. Then you can start making stuff from the different families of the Key of Solomon, such as your circles, your wands, your swords, and all of that. And
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's good to start out slow. Right now, Theophilos and I, one thing about Theophilos and I, we're practitioners, and we often do group work together. Before we worked through the Arbitel, and we worked with the Shem Angels. Right now, we're working with an Archangel type of initiation, I guess you can almost say. From Stephen Skinner published the method in Mixed Kabbalah, or Treatise on Kabbalistic Secrets or something. It's part of Welcome Manuscript 4660, and we've had some good success with it. So we experiment with things. So that's what we're currently working on. Right now, we're experimenting on something. We're always working on a grimoire. We're always doing something. I would say, man, it's a good idea to get a scrying crystal. Okay. Now, what kind of crystal? Well, the grimoires that are explicit, more often than not, they say a clear sphere, a glass sphere is perfectly fine. You can either get a quartz crystal that's clear without spot, but it's hard to do unless they're artificially made to get it totally clear. I just use a glass sphere, and it works amazingly well.
I have a
A clear
glass
crystal.
sphere.
Oh, awesome! Yeah. And then the next thing is a circle. And if you want to work with this, as long as it's like you have your radio, it's like you have your connection, your telephone is the crystal, and you don't know what can come through or get attracted, so you have your circle. So I'd say at its most basic, a circle and a scrying crystal. And here's the thing, not everyone is a good scryer. Even John D had to get someone else to scry for him. Some of it can be developed, but some people are just better scryers than others. But I think that most people can get something, but it may not be very clear always. And I think a lot of it does come from divine grace. I had really clear visions of spirits before, and I didn't feel at the time that I was bragging. I really didn't. But looking back, I think I was kind of going around being like, man, I get really clear visions of spirits. And then it kind of went away. Okay. I think it was kind of learning a lesson. You can't let pride or spiritual pride, basically. So I think humility and a connection to the divine. And again, you don't have to be Christian. You could be a Neoplatonist or a pagan. Okay. And the reason I say this is simply because there's such a big pagan community out there. I want them to feel that they have a way into this as well. If you're a pagan and you want to get into this type of magic, you can do it, but you need to understand Platonism, Neoplatonism, and Hermetism. If you're a pagan and you want to get into this stuff, you need to understand the Neoplatonic model. Read Plato, read Plotinus, read really the big one. If you want one classical text to read, it's Plato's Timaeus or Plato's Timaeus. There's different ways to say it. Timaeus. Plato's Timaeus is essential. It outlines the whole cosmology. It outlines the world, soul, everything. Plato's Timaeus. Yeah, basically, a scrying crystal and a circle are at its most basic, the very useful equipment to have. You mentioned prayer, and Saroth, you mentioned that you wanted to get in touch with your guardian angel.
Absolutely, yes.
Sometimes spirits can start talking to you in dreams. Now, dream magic is actually very common in grimoires. You see it in the Hygromantia. You see it in the PGM, or Greek magical papyri. You see it in the Key of Solomon. You see it in Linnaean's Divine Cabal, which is a text that Theophilos and I are currently still working with, the Shem Angels. Again, Theophilos and I, we do the work. We're actually practitioners. We're still working with the Divine Cabal of Lazare Linnaean, who was a French occultist, but it was transcribed into English by Frederick Hockley. But it uses dream magic. So, but the more you communicate with spirits through dream work, it begins to open up a doorway. You'll notice that you'll be dreaming, and spirits will just start talking to you when you don't ask for it. Now, if it's malevolent, if it's a nuisance, that's one thing. But if it's really a spirit that's trying to help your growth, a divine being, then I don't see the problem with it. I welcome it. Even if I didn't call it, I welcome it in that situation. But dream work can be really scary and up close, because if you're talking to a spirit through a crystal, they're just a faint image in a crystal, okay? But when you're doing dream work, that spirit can reach out and grab you. Okay, but it's basically like astral travel or something, or lucid dreaming. Really, it's kind of like lucid dreaming with spirits, but it's traditional. It's in the grimoires. But I had a spirit start to talk to me in my dreams. Really, it's that in between state is ideal, right before you wake up and right when you first start to drift off to sleep. So I think it's good to use little naps. It's very hard to do like an 8-hour sleep and communicate with spirits. It's better if you take a 30-minute nap, 1-hour nap, set your alarm, and try to communicate. But I got some secret communications. I mean, I got some operations. And one of them, I had a spirit tell me that a good way for a person to reach their holy guardian angel, not, I cannot stress this enough, not to do the Obermelon and adapt it. No, but to use a similar method. I'm not saying for people to start doing the Obermelon and, September instead of when it says, and start mixing stuff up. No, I would not recommend that, because spirits are used to being addressed in a certain way. I'm talking about the infernal hierarchies and all that comes later. But I was told basically a person can just pray on their own to God to send their holy guardian angel once in the evening, once at night. You could do 30 minutes or an hour, set your alarm, make it a daily thing, evening and morning. Pray for your guardian angel. That will be your teacher, your protector, and teach you the mysteries. Okay? And just do this. And this is kind of, in a way, it's like your own opera melon. It's a way through personal prayer to pray for God, whether you see that as the Christian God or whether you're a hermetist pagan that sees it as the divine mind. Okay. Even the pagans, the Neoplatonists and the Hermetists, they still had a monad, a one behind it all. So whether you're a pagan calling to the divine mind or a Christian, whatever, pray to the divine source to send you a guardian and protector, and it could happen. And this is very common, even in the Arbitel aphorism. I think 14. It's either 14 or 15. I think
that's the one I'm working on at the moment.
Yeah,
day and night.
Well, for that, I mean, you can, yeah. It doesn't really say when to do it on that, but yeah, you can. It's asking God to send you an angel that will teach you and be your instructor. It's right there in the Arbitel. It's built into that grimoire. It's in the Obermelon. There are other ways of working with spirit, such as dream work and personal prayer. There's more than one way to skin a cat, to use the expression. But yeah, I just think it's good to be safe, to be careful. Yeah, I think it's good to err on the side of caution. You can't be too careful, but there are more open methods that are traditional. Like I said, dream work, personal prayer, and things like that.
Fantastic. That's so much practical advice. I've been taking notes as we've been going along, and I've got like 2 pages of absolutely fantastic stuff to go off. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been wonderful, and hope to do it again. Theophilos, do you have anything?
Yeah, awesome time.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, is that it for the show?
Unless anybody's got any closing thoughts.
Well, I will end with this. If you're wanting to learn magic, remember I talked about internalizing the astrological world picture. I recommend if there's one book a person has to get, if you say, Taliesin, what's a book I can get? The number one book, Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy. Get it, read it every day. A chapter is like a page or 2. Take 1 page, read it, reread it. Spend 1 day on 1 page or 2, which is a chapter. It's like a page or 2. Spend 1 day on that. And just keep reading it and meditating on it. And this begins to build up a subjective synthesis. Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, book 1, chapters 23 through 28. If there's anyone out there, like I said, it's book 1, chapters 23 through 28. It lists the 7 planets and all their correspondences, the stones, the metals, the plants, the animals, the fish, the birds, colors, all of these things, taste, what flavors, like it says under Jupiter, that Jupiter is all sweet tasting things. The moon governs salty things, I guess like salt from the sea, and all watery things. Mars, all spicy things. It's all outlined there in Agrippa. Book 1, chapters 23 through 28. Get some flashcards, 7 flashcards, 1 for each of the 7 planets. Write down all the correspondences of Agrippa, memorize them. I think that this is essential. And if people are saying, well, what's a good stone for Mercury? Because you've got Agrippa right there. So yeah, I think that's important to memorize the correspondences of Agrippa. And I guess that's really just my closing thought. I just wanted to give that little piece of advice. And
Okay, that's pure gold, Taliesin. Thank you very much. And Theophilos?
Well, if you get into this, just know that a lot of people want to rush into it. Like, what do I start? What do I do? And the thing is, when you approach this, you have to approach it not in haste. You have to know how much time this is going to take. There's a lot of tools you're going to have to make. There's a lot of daily rituals. No, okay, I can't say a lot of daily rituals, but maybe daily praxis. There's a lot of stuff you have to memorize. And this isn't a light task. And it can't be treated lightly either.
Buckle up, you're in for the long ride.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. A lot of modern books on magic, like let's take a lot of neo-pagan books. And this is why I think a lot of neo-pagans are really looking for something. They're thirsty. They want something more. Because a lot of neo-pagan books, there are lots of wonderful books out there, but usually it just skims the beginner stuff. Like, how many books on Wicca do they need to write where it tells you how to cast a circle and what the 4 elements are? It's really tiring. It's like every time I buy a book on Wicca, it's just going to tell me how to cast a circle and to call the quarters, the sabbats and the esbats. I mean, and really it's the same with Golden Dawn magic, that type of magic. I mean, now the Golden Dawn tradition goes really deep. But I mean, like Donald Michael Craig, and I love it. But modern magic. Okay, so this other author, he also writes how to do the pentagram and hexagram rituals and the Rosy Cross ritual. Okay, we need something more than that. If you want something to sink your teeth into, it's classical magic. This is a lifetime study. You can You can be studying and practicing for 10 years, and you've just barely begun to skim the surface of the philosophy, of the practice, of the methods. And it can be overwhelming. But if you want something to sink your teeth into, it's like, okay, I've read Rigardi's Golden Dawn. I've read 6 books on Wicca. They all say how to cast a circle. I need something more. I've even gotten into Crowley. I've read about his book on yoga and the Holy Guardian Angel, and the law of liberty and all the things on freedom, and they want something more. Classical magic is where it's at. It goes very deep, man, and so unlike with other traditions, you're not going to get bored in a year or two of study, like happens a lot of times. So yeah, take your time, because this is a lifetime of knowledge. You're dealing with the knowledge of the ancients. This is the knowledge. This is a collection of knowledge that's very, very old. People have been practicing this stuff for centuries, and beyond that, really thousands of years. Let me just end with this. I don't want to totally go off on this subject, but around 2,000 years ago, we have Platonism or Neoplatonism, Neo-Pythagoreanism, Hermetism, all of these things, systems of magic, philosophy. Where did they get all this stuff? Astrology, all this stuff. Where did all this stuff come from? Now we get it through a Greek lens. Everything comes through the Greeks, basically. The Greeks themselves say they got it from the Egyptians, they got it from the Babylonians. So even though we say that these methods are like 2,000 years old, it didn't just fall out of the sky 2,000 years ago. And this stuff probably is thousands, plural, of years old. This is like really ancient. We're looking at the collection of human knowledge and wisdom, literature, wisdom teachings of how to interact with the spiritual realm and to ascend and basically scale the heavens. So you can't expect to learn the wisdom of the world in a year or 2 or even 3. So, yeah, buckle up for the long ride. That's all I've got to say.
Fantastic. That was, we've got to do this again soon. We only just, it feels like we're just scraping the surface, and that's another 3 hours we've done tonight. So,
yeah,
brilliant. Loved it.
Fantastic.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Theophilos, my new teacher, and it's I'm going to announce to the world that Theophilos has taken me on as a student. So I'm going to be, I've learned so much from him already. So
congratulations, man. You've got a good teacher there.
I know, one of the best. So I'm just going to do my best, and like you say, buckle up for the long ride.